Joining us to discuss the wider foreign policy implications of both these conflicts is Victoria Coates. She served as Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump and is now the Vice President of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. Welcome back. It's so nice to have you. I want to read you a tweet from Zelensky yesterday. He says, since the beginning of July, we have recorded active Russian satellite surveillance of the Gulf states and U.S. military facilities located there. It seems like he's gearing up to make this argument to President Trump when they meet in Washington. What is your take on this nexus between Russia and Iran possibly providing intelligence support?
Well, Christina, David, good to be with you. No, this is a very interesting development. We've all been very focused on Western Iran, on that bordering onto the Persian Gulf, the energy flows that come out of the Gulf. But there's also the north of Iran up against the Caspian Sea, as you said. And that is where the Russians have been shipping in additional support to the Iranians. And the Ukrainians have decided to strike this. They've been quite active in the Caspian throughout the 4+ years of war with Russia. So not entirely surprising, although, I mean, Russia's stretched pretty thin, so I don't know how much they have to send. But very interesting to see Ukraine now try proactively start to take a role here.
You know, I'm very curious just sort of about the state of play and your read on it when it comes to the broader conflict in the Middle East and certainly what's happening with Iran. And I'm going to quote from something you said here to the Hill, I think a little while back, about these negotiations that were taking place. You called them a waste of time. And as we kind of look at this administration weighing what to do next, whether or not to increase the kind of military action that we've seen, find other ways to get Iranians back to the negotiating table, which they seem reluctant to do, what is the path forward as you see it? If that memo of understanding didn't create the kind of environment for constructive conversations, what's it going to take to find some sort of solution here to this conflict?
No, I think the economic pressure is ultimately what's going to resolve this, David. I mean, you have an economy in Iran, which is saying it's on life support is a very kind way of putting it. The rial is approaching 2 million for $1. It was 30,000 10 years ago, so that gives you some context for that. Their stock market still isn't trading normally. It hasn't since March. Unemployment's estimated around 35–40%. They may have lost as many as 3 million jobs. And so you look at those metrics and the kind of ongoing pressure from Operation Economic Fury that Secretary Bessent initiated, it just can't go on. So I think the combination of incremental military strikes and that very heavy economic pressure will eventually bring the regime to the table. I sort of think about it a little bit like the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They go on until they can't anymore, and then suddenly you have an end to the regime. So we'll see what happens, but that to me is going to be the metric that I'm watching most closely going forward.
I mean, but that's an argument that has been made for a while, and we still haven't seen whatever the Persian equivalent is of Swan Lake playing on state TV. There does seem to be a really high threshold, as we were talking earlier about, for that regime to absorb pain and to absorb that economic hardship. However, there's a Bloomberg's analysis from Friday that quotes former U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia saying that they don't think Iran wants endless escalation. They can absorb a lot of pain, but it doesn't serve their interest to have so much infrastructure destroyed. And that makes me want to ask about what else there is left to target. We have these reports that the U.S. is running low on interceptors. They are also running out of purely military targets. What is the cost-benefit reward there of starting to target more civilian infrastructure, the things that Iran would need to rebuild if indeed it did do that in a democratic way at some point, and wanting to decimate the regime and take out whatever it can?
Well, Christina, you're absolutely correct that the regime is pretty much unlimited in the pain it will inflict on the Iranian people. Bear in mind, they're the ones who are absorbing this. The regime itself is pretty well insulated from the woes of everyday Iranians. But as you said, the civilian infrastructure, so-called, is essentially what's next. And bear in mind, in Iran, most of and what we would consider to be civilian infrastructure is controlled by and exploited by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the more extreme element of the Iranian military. So these are all what you might say are dual-use facilities. And the president up until now has been very reluctant to strike them because he doesn't wish to inflict additional pain on the Iranian people, unlike their own leadership. But that may be what it takes, particularly around Tehran, where the inhabitants of Tehran have pretty high expectations for the services that they receive. If you start to, impede impede their ability to provide water, electricity, that kind of thing to the inhabitants of the city, you might have a really bad problem. So not a step anybody wants to take. It may be a step that the regime forces the administration to take.
I want to quote something here from the New York Times just about the thinking of the president at this moment about where things go from here when it comes to Iran. By late Friday, Mr. Trump appeared to temporarily put aside the bigger bombing plans, apparently persuaded, at least in part, by his military advisor's assessment of dwindling supplies of munitions to defend American troops in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE. A major attack would most likely have drawn a heavier Iranian retaliation. Victoria Coates, you bring a unique perspective here. You worked for this president. You saw him wrestle with foreign policy decisions in the past, and I'm wondering about the way that he can change his mind, how he thinks through issues like this one. I'm struck also just by the way that his tone, his tack toward Ukraine has changed in recent weeks. We saw him in a much friendlier form with President Zelensky at the NATO summit, the G7 summit before that. How plastic is his thinking when it comes to foreign policy? How resolute is he? And sort of what do you make of the way that he seems to be in real time considering these different outcomes or different paths forward?
Well, President Trump really is not an ideologue in these kinds of issues. He's very much, I mean, the principle of America first is what guides his thinking. And so it's not so much, what did we do last year, the year before? It's where are the opportunities right now? And so it makes him a very dynamic thinker on these issues. He very much is looking for opportunities, the unexpected. I remember saying to him at one point, you've given us a tremendous amount of leeway as policymakers because nobody knows what you're going to do. It could be anything. And so it tends to put our foes on a little bit of a back foot because, you can sort of assume, oh, he's not going to strike. He's concerned about interceptor levels. And then that's when he does it. So I think we should all be prepared to be surprised in coming hours. It's going to be a very interesting week in Washington. We have the funeral of Senator Lindsey Graham coming up, I believe, on Tuesday. So there's going to be a parade of foreign dignitaries coming through Washington. Again, that is an opportunity. And I think Senator Graham would be the first to urge the president to take advantage of it, that folks are showing up in person. He can have a lot of these meetings one-on-one and see what might be possible. But very interesting if, as we were discussing, Ukraine starts to play a more active role in the Iran war. That could be something that comes out of this.
It does seem like a fitting way to honor a senator who had a lot of reach internationally, that all these leaders are coming into town and will probably be at least trying to have an audience with the president.
Bend the ear to the president, yeah.
Exactly. I want to play you some sound, speaking of Ukraine, from President Zelensky, talking about his relationship with President Trump from, of all people, Laura Loomer.
It seems like the relationship has greatly improved. Is there something that you could share with the viewers about maybe your conversations with the president?
You are right. The tone has changed. Absolutely. We had first changing moment in Rome, in Vatican. Yeah. Yes, it was not long meeting, but I always said that is, I think, historic moment because we changed the relations during 15, 20 minutes. So nobody was around us. We've been only two of us. And I was very happy to hear President, and I hope, and he heard me, and I heard him. And I think it was, let it be between two of us, but it was very good.
The evolution of Loomer and some other MAGA influencers this week going from being vehemently anti-Ukraine to, in some cases, in her case, apologizing for past remarks, going to visit the president, and now saying, they are on Ukraine's side. I'm wondering if President Trump is swayable in the same way, how much influence he takes from people like Laura Loomer and how much influence he takes from other allies and even some members of the Republican Party who have been trying to get him to be more supportive of Ukraine. What are your expectations out of this meeting?
Well, again, I think this is a situation where the president's going to look for an opportunity. And I look at the last 18 months. I think, we had that very fractious meeting in the Oval Office at the beginning of President Trump's second term. But I think that actually had a very beneficial effect. I think President Zelensky went back to Kiev and said, gee, this is a very different United States. We're going to have to figure out what we're going to do. And that's when they started escalating this drone production that's been so successful for them, the long-range attack attack drones. And I think that NATO also got the message from President Trump, you guys are going to have to do more. This isn't as much as it takes for as long as it takes, which is a bumper sticker, not a strategy. So he was right to get rid of that approach. But at the same time, it really galvanized our European allies to start doing a lot more. And that has really moved the needle going forward. And I mean, I don't know Laura Loomer. I wouldn't take my national security advice from her, but I think it is interesting, success attracts interest. And the Ukrainians have really changed the momentum on the battlefield. Hopefully, this has an effect on Putin. The Russian economy is also suffering fairly significantly. And when he starts to take some damage to the core industries that fuel that Russian economy, that will put some pressure on his oligarch friends, that is what may actually change his decision making, get him to the negotiating table to come up with a deal that's acceptable to Ukraine and Washington, not just dictated by Moscow.